Yeah, hi peeps, it's Tess back in the old squat box once again, and I'm making this video largely because I've been waiting to make it for, about 40 years. Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, ex-Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, is dead. And already the rewriting of history has started. Most of the morning I've been watching BBC News programmes, and it's amazing the amount of people, these amount of political pundits and analysts and politicians from around the era are all come out and saying how wonderful it was and how strong she was and how she remade and rebuilt Britain, and it's like, did these people live through the same period of time that I lived through, the Margaret Thatcher time, from 79 to 90? I don't quite remember it the way they remember it, This is a fact. In the first term of office of Margaret Thatcher, the unemployment rate in the United Kingdom rose to 5 million. 5 million in a country that at the time probably only had 48 to 50 million people in it. They almost kicked her out. Her own party almost asked her to step down in her first term. She destroyed the industrial base and the manufacturing base in the United Kingdom by basically privatising everything in sight. Pulling down factories, closing factories, cutting back on public spending, austerity, austerity, austerity. That's how wonderful she rebuilt Britain. She destroyed it. Her idea was that if she was to sell off and close down all the government-owned factories and industry, that privatisation would work. The private companies would come in, they would buy up these old, defunct and badly managed public companies and would rejuvenate Britain. But unfortunately that's not what happened. What happened was they closed the factories down, they invested in building new factories overseas where the operating costs would be lower because it was cheaper labour. And this is why she ended up with 5 million people in the first term of office unemployed. Close an industry down, like the steel industry, the electric production industry. You close that down and hand it over to the private market. Obviously some of it needs to be kept in this country, but none of it was actually really changed into real private hands. Every single one of the industries that she basically smashed and sold off to private owners also kept a huge state input of taxpayers' money in order to help them to rebuild, to refurbish and rebuild the trains, the steel industry, the electric production industry. Her idea was, well, we'll sell off the private industry, they'll get people to buy the stocks and that, they'll use the money from the stocks and shareholders to invest back into these companies and rebuild them. But that's not what happened. In order for them to actually roll out modernisation of these industries, the government had to keep giving them hundreds of millions of pounds every year free from the taxpayer. So she didn't change anything. In fact, she made it worse because, as I say, a lot of these places, they shut down the production in this country, built a factory in South America, the Far East, and used cheap labour from those continents to build steel, make ships. They didn't invest in Britain. They took their money overseas. You see this in America now. America gave companies tax breaks. What did they do? Well, they shut down the factories in America, built them overseas where it was cheaper labour, and they got a tax break for it. America paid to ship its jobs overseas. This is what Thatcher did. She continued to keep paying these privatised companies money every year, and we're still doing it. She privatised the railway over 30 years ago, and we are still paying taxpayers' money into these industries for them to rebuild the railway. The railways are in a fucking shambles in Britain at the moment. That's how wonderful Margaret Thatcher's idea of reconstructing Britain turned out to be. So for all these people trying to rewrite the history of Margaret Thatcher, please look back at the history. Look back at the now defunct industries that Britain used to have badly run, I'm sure, badly managed, you know, and instead of modernising it by paying people at the top, sacking the old boys network, the guy with the school tie who came from Oxford or Cambridge, the fuckers who ran it into the ground because they were incompetents, instead of employing people of industry who could manage those industries for the country, they sold them off to the same people who were running them into the ground badly in the first place, and continued to run them into the ground badly. We no longer have a steel industry to speak of in the United Kingdom. We have no coal industry. Our railways are trashed. Still can't make money. Not without the government taxpayers' money they pay into them every year, which they take some of and pay out as shareholders' payments. The water, still today, they've privatised the water in this country, which used to be owned by the people who built it. It was the people who built the municipalities, the towns, the cities. They paid to have their water upgraded because they knew that water would help people to live longer, fresh water. So it was taxpayers' money that built the water, that put all that plumbing into place, put all those pipes underground, and they did need modernised, yeah. But we've sold them off to private industry, and over the last 20, 25 years, the water industry still receives money from the government. They still lose millions of gallons of water every month through leakages and burst pipes, which they haven't replaced yet. And in order to pay for that, they get tax supplements from the government to help them to try and convince them to invest. The government gives you so many £1 million, you put so many £1 million in, you replace the pipes. Well, they got that money from government. Do you know how they got the money to make up their side of the bargain? They put the price of water up. They did the same with the trains. The government gives them hundreds of millions a year to fix the tracks, modernise the tracks, and they're supposed to put in the same amount on the other side from investment. How did they do that? They put the train fares up. You know, it just didn't work. Margaret Thatcher's new world economy for the British people has been a total fucking disaster. The only people that got rich is the top 2%, 5% of the country, like it's always been. The rich get richer, and the poor pay for them getting rich. That's the way it's always been. It's the way it is now in Britain, it's the way it is now in Europe, it's the way it is now in America. So thank you very much, Reagan and Thatcher, for giving us this wonderful idea of privatising every fucking thing in sight, you know. It's a bit like an apple farm, and they make their money every year from the apples they grow. But instead of, when they run into a bit of cash flow, instead of borrowing money from the bank, looking for a better harvest next year, it's as if they sold off their apple trees and then rent them back every year from the person they sold them to. And every year the person they sold them to puts the rent for those apple trees up until it gets to the point where you can't get enough apples off those trees to make enough apple juice or cider or, you know, apple chutney to cover the cost of renting the apple trees. You just don't sell off something that you're making your major profit from. Sometimes what you need to do is sack the management. A perfect example is recently the banks, and get this, Margaret Thatcher and Reagan were instrumental in the deregulation changes that happened over the last 30-35 years to the banking industry and the investment industry. And what happened in 2008, yeah, the banks collapsed because of greed, avarice and stupidity at the top of these huge companies and multinationals and corporations. Did we do anything to change that? Did we sack any of them? Well, in Britain we sacked a few. We closed a few down, we took some back into public ownership. But we still made really bad decisions in how we did that. We still gave them billions of pounds free money. And they've paid some of it back, but not all of it. Some of it was just free money straight in their pockets, you know. Thatcher started that revolution in the investment industry, that revolution in banking. And America, as well as Britain, is refusing to, you know, reverse the tide. Not a single person on Wall Street's been arrested for the fraud and theft that they perpetrated. None of the big banks in America. People at the top, none of them were sacked, none of them were taken to court, none of them had anything recovered from them with money they stole. No. Never went through a court, never had any of their assets taken off them. No, they're still within high hog. At least in Britain we did something. We took some of these organisations over again back into public ownership, but we didn't really solve the problem because it's still the same kind of people who are at the top, setting their own wages, continue to drive up the interest that ordinary people pay on any money they borrow from the bank, even though they've reduced the amount of interest anyone gains from money you save in the bank. So thank you very much, Margaret Thatcher, and I'm glad you're dead, you old bitch. I can only say she didn't die fast enough. If she'd have died in maybe 1984 or something like that, just at the end of her first term, or even fucking 1979, before I got fucking sacked from one of the best jobs I've ever had. Well, whatever. I'm glad to see she's dead, and even when she's dead, she's costing us money. How much is it going to cost us if this fucking carriage drawn fucking through London and hundreds of thousands of armed forces to line the way to salute her, and you know what I mean? She's still costing the taxpayers money. She's getting a very expensive taxpayers paid funeral. Why couldn't her family just have took her and thrown her in a fucking oven? You know what I mean? What the fuck? Cremate her, scatter her and ashes somewhere nice in London, you know, like the Thames. Couldn't pull it that much more anyway. And that would have settled it, you know. No, you've got to drive her corpse through the fucking whole of London, man, you know. All we're going to hear for weeks and weeks and weeks now is Margaret Thatcher, the saviour of Britain. Doesn't take much, does it, for people to start rewriting history. Thank you, Margaret, for all the fucktartness you brought to Britain. Sad, really. Swanjiva.